All right, so let's move on to question number 2. This one is a bit lengthy, so bear with us, everybody. It's from Walter in Belleville, Michigan. And Walter says, I have been living in my grandmother's home for the past 4 years. I have invested about $40,000 in improvements to the home, including having a new roof replaced last year. Last week, my uncle came to me and said, I do not own the home. He has a deed that shows he owns the home and that he bought the home for my grandmother. This is even though I have a deed for the house from my great aunt. Okay. This deed was not recorded. I have been paying taxes and have done all of the repairs. My great uncle lives across the street and he has been watching me do all of these improvements all along with 3 exclamation points. What are my rights? Help, from Walter H. in Belleville.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's kind of a doozy. Well, let's just get to the the essence. Let's cut right to the chase. I'm wondering how Walter, I'd like to see the deed that he has from his great aunt, okay, for the property. That's number one. I'd like to know, was there a probate action, how this all came about, why the great aunt felt that she had the right to give a deed. It sounds like to me, I'd have to see the deed. Again, here we get to probate now, probate in real estate. It could be that the great aunt might have been the personal representative. So that might be a personal representative deed. So we'll have to see the deed. And it's very likely before Walter says how, he's like, help, it's very likely that he really does have title to that property and that perhaps Walter's great aunt did have the authority to deed over the property. We have no idea. If Walter's great aunt just gave a deed out of nowhere, it would be a quitclaim deed. She's making no representations. Maybe the grandmother was never entitled. That's number one. So we have to see the deed. And then if it requires more investigation, we'd probably look into whether or not grandma had a probate action or grandma had a will. Okay? That would be number one. Then the second thing we would do after we kind of clarify that issue is if the uncle actually owned the home the whole time, there's these equitable considerations. There's in the law, there's the law, which is statutory and legislation, and then there's something called equity, and that's a form of fairness. And the courts in all of the country now sit both in law, we call that sitting in law, and in equity. Courts are supposed to dispense justice and fairness besides also doing what the law states. So if you have a guy who knew that the property was his and Walter wasn't aware that he wasn't the owner, but it's putting all this money in, there may be some fairness here, like some equitable doctrine that would allow Walter to receive some of that benefit back. It'd be different if the uncle wasn't sitting across the street watching. I'm not laughing at you, Walter, but if the uncle wasn't sitting across the street watching all this play out, that's a different story. Walter's uncle can't sit there and go, well, thank you very much. I've been watching you for the past 4 or 5 years, improving the home. Right. There's something there that, there's a promise, we call it estoppel. There's certain things that you just can't benefit from, but it's not that easy to unwind. So I should hope that this was a probate matter and that the aunt had the right, and that's, to deed the property. And that's where we really start. And in 30 years of practice, I've learned that everything's very organic, okay? So we can't speculate. We have to let things unfold, and we take, steps. And we don't speculate the what ifs. I mean, I do, but my client shouldn't do that until we, uncover the next issue and address that issue. So it's one step at a time. Walter, you're welcome to give me a call here at the number. It's a fascinating story, and we hope it only works out for the best. But I definitely need to see the documents again. We have to see it.
All right. So Walter, give David a call so that we can sort that whole mess out. All right.
That is a mess.
Yes. Yes, it is. Poor guy.
Yeah, poor guy. Sorry, Walter.
Okay, let's get into the third question of the evening from Kurt in Beverly Hills. And Kurt says, I want to kick my land contract buyer out of the home. They have not paid the taxes and have never provided evidence of the insurance that they were supposed to have on the home. The buyer says that since he is current on the payments, I don't have any rights against him. Can this be right? From Kurt in Beverly Hills. Michigan, by the way, not Beverly Hills, California.
Beverly Hills, which is a nice community right out.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, Birmingham,
beautiful West Side.
Very nice, right? Well, again, here we go. Because everything is based on contracts mostly, I'd have to see the land contract. Okay, that's number one. But number two, in general, just from years of doing many land contracts, most land contracts will have provisions in there that require the purchaser under land contract to take care of taxes and insurance and whatever other utilities the parties have agreed to. So we would need to see the provisions as to who agreed to do what. And it doesn't matter that the buyer is current with the purchase price, with the payment, because there's something called a non-monetary default. So failure to pay on the land contract is a monetary default. And there's something called non-monetary default, which means a material default in the contract, paying or failure to pay your taxes and failure to pay your insurance when the contract requires you to do so is most certainly a material item and provision and obligation of whatever party has agreed to pay those items. So yeah, I'll have to see the contract, but if they haven't paid it, it's very likely that they're in default and you can proceed against them. I have a feeling that if you did the land contract with an attorney and you didn't do it on your own, that you'll find that the documents say it's a material default.
Okay. Yep. That one's probably going to be the most cut and dry one of the evening, but that seems like that makes sense, because if you're not paying the taxes, then you're putting the property at risk of being taken by the municipalities. So you can't do things like that. I believe in the land contract that I have, which David structured for me. It even has provisions in there where, like, I can't just let the property fall into some sort of disrepair or disarray or anything like that. So I don't know if that would be one of those. And this is me just kind of like extending, going off on my own trail here. But like, if I were to continue to make my payments and pay taxes, etc., but I was letting the house fall apart, could the seller then do the same thing, come and foreclose on me, or not foreclose on me per se, because that's a provision within the land contract?
Yeah, so that's a non-monetary.
Yep, so that's another one of those material. Okay.
The problem with that, let me just share with you, Blair, if somebody, that's all subjective.
Okay.
It's a little less, it's not as easy to enforce, but it's enforceable nonetheless. So how do you do that? Well, you just can't go to court and go, oh, they don't cut the lawn. And but what you can do is, look, I've gotten 10 citations or 2 citations, whatever the number is.
Sure.
Once you have that citation, that's something that could support and validate what you're claiming, that they're keeping the property and the upkeep is poor. Yeah, something you would need a third-party kind of objective confirmation.
Gotcha. Yeah, but just asking that question kind of in support of what Kurt's buyer is saying, is he's claiming since he's making the payments, he doesn't have to do anything else. So
it's a good question, and you're right. It's pretty. You're now an experienced investor, Blair. So you go with your gut, and you're right. It's a default.
Okay. All right. Well, all right, Kurt. That's good to know. So we've got a positive there. Again, have to see the documentation, but most likely, Kurt, you are in the right. So that's great. All right.
We're one for Kurt.
I know. Chalk